Yeah, hi there, my name's Chris. I work for the BBC, but before that I used to do quite a lot of stuff that involved doing graphs and plots and things, so that's what I'm talking about. So the problem is, we've got some data, maybe some statistics of our application, or some sales data, or some financial data, or something, and we want to display it to our users, or, and sometimes this is kind of conflicting, we actually want to explore that data and try and understand it ourselves. So work out, what we can draw from that data, what we can learn from the data. And in Ruby, there are very few native data visualization tools, unfortunately. We're not as lucky as Python has quite a lot of quite mature plotting libraries, and if you use something like MATLAB or R, it comes built with a lot of things. So we have to sort of cobble stuff together a bit. So this talk is about a survey of what I could find about data visualization, and I'll go back, and I'm going to try and I've put a lot of code samples up on GitHub, so if you want to get started quickly, then hopefully you've got a starting point to investigate. But some of the examples are by nature quite simple, so it's the simplest thing I could get to work so that you guys can do more complicated stuff with it. So people have probably seen plots like this. This is Scruffy, and this is pretty much the best we've got native Ruby plotting library. And this gets used quite a lot, but it generates SVG-based graphs, which is really nice, kind of vector-based graphs, and it has sort of basic plot types, pie charts, line graphs, histograms. It's not really been developed a lot recently. There's not an awful lot going on with it. Somebody might correct me, but I couldn't find a lot of activity. And it doesn't really let you do a lot of data analysis or anything particularly sophisticated. If you want to do something clever, you have to write it yourself. So in this talk, like I said, just a survey of alternative data visualization libraries and basic samples for you to play with at home. The code is in my GitHub account, Chris Lowe, Data Visualization Ruby. Right, so the first one I'm going to talk about, I'm trying to go from simple to complicated, I think. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Google, which is the Google Charts API. I think probably a lot of you have probably played with this. So there are some Ruby bindings for it, which help you generate a URL that you can do a GET request on from Google Charts API, and it responds with the location of an image that you can then embed in your website or display to your users. So here's a quick example. So I've just got some little stock data chart that gives us some stock data, and using the Google chart Ruby gem, I think it's Google R chart RB, or I don't know why the gem name is different to the thing you require as always. It gives you line charts, pie graphs, this kind of thing, and gives you this sort of DSL. So you can say what your data is, that's in my Y variable, grids, axes, this kind of thing. I've got the months on there, and you've got a limit to the resolution of the final image you can generate. So this is about the maximum you can do, 400 by 300 pixels. And if you do that, you get a URL that resolves to something that looks like that, which is alright. Here's a few examples of other things you can do with it: Venn diagrams, scatter graphs, funny polar chart things, world maps. Yeah, it's quite nice. If you want something, especially to display to end users, that you don't need to generate, you don't want to play with interactively, you just want to, you've got some data, you want to get something, you embed it in the website, and your Rails app or something to display back. It works quite well. And it doesn't require any dependencies other than the fact that you can talk to the Google Charts API. I've got another web-based one from a company called Timemetric. I've seen a couple of talks by them this year. I think they're pushing their thing quite aggressively, so I may as well join in. It's a data analysis web service. It's free to use. You can upload your data through the site or through an API, and then you can compare your data with your own data sets that you've uploaded. You can embed the graphs in your website, in your Rails app, for people to play with. And you can also, which is quite nice, you can compare your data with public data sets. So they're trawling through all the kind of government statistical archives so that you can get things of the price of corn from 1870 to 1920. Jesus. Okay. So you've got an authentication key. You've got to get an API. That's okay. I'm using my same stock data little class to get some data, and then all you do is a post with the authentication headers to this URL. And then it gives you back a URL where you can find your stuff on a Timemetric website. So if you go there, you get a dashboard, and all of the stuff that you've uploaded is available. And I can select 2 things that I've uploaded, which might be my own things, or like I say, something from their archives. And then you get a chart that you can kind of play around with and embed this in your own website, or you can go in there and look at the points of time, and you can put curves through it and this kind of thing, do some data fitting. It's not hugely powerful, but I think it's going to get more and more powerful as they work out what it is they actually want to do with it. But it's quite easy to play with because it's just a RESTful API. Okay, so moving on. So this is another library called Tioga, which uses Latex, which is a scientific publishing language, as its backend. So it's got a pretty heavy dependency in that you've got to have Latex on your machine. So it might not be something you want to do on a production Rails app or something, but if you want to generate some stuff for a report, or you want to generate an offline document and things, this is a good way because it generates really, really nice looking PDF charts. A bit of admission, I haven't got any code samples for you, but I can show you some examples. I will get some code samples of that this week. So here's an example, and because it uses LaTeX underneath, LaTeX is a very powerful mathematical typesetting language, so if you want to do things like put mathematical symbols in there or equations, you can do that. And it generates very nice plots in PDF that, I guess if you're using one of those, like Prawn or something like that, one of those Ruby reporting libraries, you can pull these charts and really easily include them. It's quite nice, but I guess it's just, yeah, I mean, because I came from that background, when you want to generate nice plots for scientific papers, then this is quite appealing. Here's a nice one. Okay, now, right, this was the right thing now, so I hope you appreciate it. This J3 chart, which is a big Java enterprise plotting library, which does all kinds of stuff, and it's very big, and you can use it from JRuby. So I did get it working. I've done the simplest thing I can possibly do, and it's still 2 pages of code. So because it's Java, you've got a bunch of... Okay, so you've got to require Java at the top, and then you've got to stick your JCOM and J3 chart jars in your class path, apparently. And then you can include the classes, and then you can call them. So here is the initializer, which just says my data set is a pie chart, and my chart creates the chart. And then there's a thing that renders it to a file, and it supports lots of formats, so you can render it out to different formats. And then this is the thing that actually does the plotting. So we've got a data set which is a pie chart, the pie chart. You see what's coming. And then you can do things. So this is really simple, because when I wanted to just do an XY line graph, the number of options were massive. But you've got real fine control over everything you want to do, and it's callable from JRuby natively. It's actually quite quick. I was quite surprised how easy it is to call something that's Java libraries from JRuby. I've not done it before. It's quite good. At the end, you render it to a file, and this is what we get. So that's the simplest thing I can do. So if you want to start playing with this thing, you can now read the J3 chart API docs, and then hopefully plug the bits into there, the different types of data set, the different types of charts, and build something a bit more complicated, like this. And if anyone's played with Clojure, which is this kind of Encanter is like a statistical processing thing on top of Clojure, and they use J3 chart for their plots. So I've pulled a couple from there. Quite nice scatter plots, and it has sort of line fitting things in there you can call histograms. There's another scatter plot. Yeah, they're quite nice. GNU plot, I like GNU plot. So GNU plot is a really, really old plotting program that's been around for a long time, but it's still under very active development. It's quite stable, and it also has some data analysis stuff in there as well. So rather than just drawing graphs, you can do things like give me a line of best fit, or fit a curve to this, or try and model this with a particular order of polynomial or something like that. But like I say, it's still active development. One thing they've added in the recent one is HTML5 canvas plots. You can actually generate things that you've got some interactivity through canvas, 3D plots, animation. The binding, there are a couple of bindings to Ruby. Where you can do things like x equals this and then plot x, y, and you've got kind of basic sort of bindings, but they're lagging the current features of GNU plot quite a lot. And to be honest, it's easier to just learn GNU plot, which is quite simple, and use popen. There's a book. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of documentation, which is really good. So here's a way of doing it. So we just open, you've seen this today already, open a pipe to GNU plot, and then we can pipe these commands in. So I'm saying output me SVG, the output is a file for curves.fgg, and I'm plotting from -10 to 10, and then these are built-in functions, sine, tan. So there's actually built-in functions as well as you can load your own data in there, and then you can plot it, and you get something like that. And that's an SVG, so it's nice and scalable, and that's quite nice. And then GNU plot lets you do all kinds of crazy things, 3D plots, and there's a massive library of things well worth looking into. And it's very simple to just generate files straight to disk that you could even then do that on a background job and include in a Rails app. Or, yeah, it's good. And finally, I think R. R is a statistical programming language, but it does much more than plotting. It does data analysis, linear algebra. You can do statistical tests, clustering, lots and lots and lots of things, and lots of libraries that other people have written that you can pull in and use. There's two ways to use it from Ruby that I've found. One is a simple way of just, again, there's a Ruby variant on RS Ruby, and that gives you a command that lets you eval something into R. So it basically just pipes your commands into R. So if you're familiar with R already, you're prepared to learn it, you can learn that this is what does a box plot. And in R, what we call an array is written like this. So we've got two arrays, and this generates a PDF file, and we can call it. Or you can use RS Ruby with its bindings, and what that will do is it will handle the conversions from Ruby data types to R data types for you, and you can also define your own mappings as well. So in this case, we're actually doing the same thing, a box plot, but in here we're passing Ruby arrays of data in, and the bindings themselves are handling the translation. And when we do that, we get this kind of plot. It's quite simple. Something a little bit more complicated, just to show you some things you can do with R. Here I want to fit a line to some noisy data, so I'm generating an array for my x-axis, and for my y-axis I'm just doing a linear relationship by adding some random noise to it. And then in order to use some of the built-in R functions, so here I want to fit a linear model to this data, I actually have to use this thing called assign that RS Ruby gives you. So I assign my x to an R value called x, and y to y. And when I do that, I can then call this linear modeling command on those two sort of mapped variables. So it's there's lots of things to learn if you want to do this, but this takes lots of options. But this is very simple. This is x tilde y, so it's like x. Y is a model based on x. There's a relationship between x and y, and that's what this syntax is saying. And then I'm plotting, again using the bindings, and I want to fit a line to it using coefficients. So a linear fit. And I get something like that as a result. And there's lots more you can do. Something that's very interesting is clustering. So if you have a model and you want to work out what parameters things are clustering around, it's all built in there, and it gives you something that you can explore the data. But because of the bindings, you can actually get your data sources from wherever you have them already in your Ruby code. So that's very quick, so please look at the GitHub code and any questions.
Did you put your GitHub account?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Any questions at all from anybody?
If you were trying to make some sort of very pretty looking charts for, say, print, what would you use to do that? What would be your choice? What would be my choice? So you know what you want to do with the data already, and you want to create something that's nice for print. I might use, so I tend to use Latex for that kind of thing anyway, so I'd probably use Tioga. But to be honest, I'd use GNU plot, I think,
And GNU plot has lots of terminals, so one of them is SVG. But you can actually have LaTeX as a terminal. So when you generated your plot, it'll actually export the LaTeX code that would generate that plot for you using MetaPost or something. And that would be a really nice way of doing it. Yeah. Cool.
Do you know the output of Tioga, or Tioga, and is it LaTeX or LaTeX? I'm not sure either. But there's a Zelatech, or Zelatech, which is natively TrueType and PDF and stuff like that. So you can output things that are a lot nicer than the traditional LaTeX with the Open Computer modern font. You don't need special fonts for it, you just use your system fonts. Do you know if Tioga can use that? Or does it really couple?
I don't think it can. But then I'm not quite sure how that compiler works. So I think you can, with ZLaTeX, you can compile something that's written for other LaTeX, can't you? And you don't have to do too much to. So I've got a feeling you might be able to make it use it, but I don't think it's supported as an option. But maybe the GNU plot where you could, I think, because you just generate LaTeX source code that you could then compile with.
A tool I've used, which is quite good on the sort of flashy side of things, because it looks in Flash and does animations and stuff like that, is Handcharts. But it doesn't do a lot in terms of cleverness. It's really just easy.
There's a Ruby like that called Ambling. It's really good actually. And it's just abstracts the way you enable all charts into Ruby.
So that's Amchart, and the Ruby bindings are Amlink. Ambling.
Like, you know,
oh yeah, okay. Ambling.
There's a kind of open source equivalent to Flipchart with an open structure for the chart.
Yeah, and I mean something I've not talked about at all is even the last couple of weeks. I think there was a new jQuery based or JavaScript based plotting thing. So if you're
high charts.
Yeah, high charts. That's it. So if your requirements are to give something flashy for the users to use and display the data to them, then maybe that's the way to go.
Flot is a good jQuery.
Okay. Good. Excellent.